Hi everyone, it's Sandra here with a COVID voice, so my apologies for sounding like this. I am outdoors with my bin, Eat My Shorts, and it's been 23 days since I was in here. I set up that bin within the bin migration. Worms have not been looked in on, and they were due for a check-in when COVID struck, so it's been a bit of a delay, so let's see how they are doing. And that's okay. If you've set your bins up right, and this one is not in the sunshine, it's got this bubble wrap on top, so it's not going to dehydrate, and it's been 23 days, and the bin is perfectly fine, which would have been the same if we'd gone away, but unfortunately we didn't. We were just stuck inside. All right, so here's the burlap blanket. Oh, that white that you're seeing on the burlap blanket, those are springtails. And you can see that they are, if I hold still, you can see them moving around. But you'll also see, if I just move this a little bit, that alongside the springtails are worms. There's a worm right there in the burlap. And I'll just get him into focus there. There we go. Worms are not affected at all by the springtails. They are all decomposers. There's another worm in the burlap. They're all decomposers, and they work alongside each other. In fact, when the springtails die, they serve as an important source of chitin for the worms. Okay, so let me just move this aside, and we will check that bin within a bin. I was trying to migrate the worms into this area so that I could eventually pull out all of this area. I'm not going to show it on camera, but I've got a spider crawling out of my bin. I'm just going to flick him. So he is gone. Okay, so this is my bin within a bin, and I'm really curious to see how this is set up. Did the worms go into it? Remember, they had to actually crawl over the top into this. I set it up with carbon and food in there. So I'll just use this container right here, and we'll just empty the bin within a bin. Oh, and it's a fast food container, and you can see when I just tried to lift it up there that it would not move. Okay, so obviously I've left it so long that the worms have perhaps eaten their way through this bin within a bin, but I'm just going to lift it up as best I can. Yeah, it's barely hanging on. Oh, and there's a centipede. Do you see the centipede in this container crawling around there? They are very fast moving. They are also decomposers. They are carnivores. So if I caught him there, yes, I did. He's on my hands. I'm going to throw him out of my bin, not because I don't think they will help catch all these larvae and everything that are in here. They're carnivores, they'll eat them all, but they also eat wisps. So when I find them in an outdoor bin, I just throw them to go live their lives somewhere else. All right, so this bin within a bin, there it is. The bin itself is mostly decomposed. Worms are in it. I set this up with compost and leaves and food. And so there you go. It's a little worm bin. And let's see what they did with this avocado, one of those petrified avocados. Patrick just noted much the same thing on his channel recently. Yeah, don't know whether it's a seasonal thing with avocados, but see how it's not even flesh. But the worms are getting into it. They eventually do. All right, so this bin, obviously I was setting up a migration because this area of the bin is mostly done. And so now that I've lost some time to sick time, I'm not really prepared to pull this material out yet. So I'm just going to do a regular feeding in this end zone and just, pull some chunky bits and use that fast food container as part of the carbon now for the bin. So there was my bin within a bin experiment. Yes, you could use it as a migration. You definitely could if that's what your goal is. But right now, my goals have sort of changed because we're way behind on some other projects because we were sick this week, and I'm not in a position to pull this material out just yet, but these worms need a feeding. So what I will do is I'll put some nice dry carbon in here and feed them up after I do a quick bin check-in. So let's just take a look at the rest. Let's just take a look. Yeah, this is very moist, and look at all the worms. So the migration actually wasn't that successful. The bin within a bin did not attract most of the worms. It's probably because it's premature to harvest this bin. There's still, as you can see, a lot of carbon in here, and when there's carbon, the worms get into it. So, you know, I'll put that over here when I find something infested with worms. But otherwise, they're just scattered. They're just scattered through here. This is beautiful vermicompost. It's far too damp to sift. And so the worms are just loving it, living their best lives in this lovely damp vermicompost. And so I could do one of my lazy migrations and worry about baiting or handpicking the worms out of this material at a later date. And I might do that once I'm caught up on our other projects. All right, so there we go. So I've aerated. The compression is actually not that bad in this bin. Like I said, it's been doing its own thing for 23 days. And so I'm almost all the way down to the bottom. I'm actually not going to go all the way to the bottom. This is not siftable, but it's also not super damp. I think it's just about the perfect moisture for worms. I think that it's just going to be hard to get them out of here while it's such a perfect moisture. But there we go. I've pulled out some big chunks. This is far too deep, in my opinion, which is why it has to be harvested. That's one of the conditions I use to assess whether I need to harvest a bin is the depth of the vermicompost. The deeper it gets, the more it's going to hold on to moisture, and the more it's going to compress. And the worms love it. I was speaking with another Worm Channel member this week, and I said, you know, even when Gilligan, my turtle-shaped worm bin, was like 18 inches deep, and I harvested it, I found worms kind of pressed up against the bottom like little mimes, perfectly fine. Even though you would think, how could they live at the bottom of that compression? But they did, and they chose to be down there. I don't think they were trapped at all. And so anyway, I think that's where the moisture was, which is why the worms are down the bottom. All right, so I've put kind of chunky bits that I just sifted loosely with my fingers into this feeding zone. And so I'm just going to give some new carbon in this area and a regular feeding. So this is just some of our leaves that we set aside last fall. It's mildly damp, but not damp enough. The food will take care of the moisture. So there we go. So the leaves go over that end. You can see that I'm now setting up to be a different kind of migration zone, kind of a 75-25. So this 25% will stay in the bin when I eventually pull it out. Here's my food today. Some eggshells on the top. This food has been waiting to be fed to the worms for at least a week, and it's actually been sitting in my greenhouse. Oh, there's a wood bug already in it. That's cool. And so this is well on its way to being broken down. There's some tissue at the bottom, so more carbon. That's great. There's Scotty's tissues. All right, so there's probably enough food for this bin. Just cover it up again with some of our leaves. I think that's going to be fine. And you know what? I think our goal will be for next time is how much does this end sink? Because right now it's probably a good, I I would say 3 centimeters or just over an inch, maybe even 3.5 to 4 centimeters higher than the vermicompost. So let's see, does the new feeding zone shrink, or does the old end with the vermicompost shrink? Now, because this container still has worms in it, you can see them crawling around, and a little wood bug, a little pill bug. I'm just going to invert it over the feeding zone. That will help keep moisture in there. Then I just got to add the top dressing. So for this worm bin, they are eating their way through a grocery bag and a burlap blanket. And so I can just loosely put those on the top again. Doesn't have to be neat and tidy. In fact, I think the airflow is actually good for a bin. Then I can just put the bubble wrap on, check the walls to make sure there are no babies that are being hung up on the walls. And I found one. There's a baby that was hung up on the wall. So that's one of the things I like to check when I'm leaving a bin, just because that little baby probably wouldn't have been able to find its way down into the moisture before it dried out. Alrighty, everyone. Thanks for stopping by. Bye for now.